My mother looked at me across the dinner table and said the four words that changed everything. We're cutting you off. Not we need to talk, not we've been thinking. Just flat, final, like she was telling me the dishwasher needed to be emptied. My fork was still in my hand. I remember that. I remember the green beans on my plate and the way my brother was staring at his phone like none of this was happening, and the way my father was looking at the wall behind my head instead of at me. Until you apologized to your sister, my mother added, properly, in front of us. My sister Lee was sitting right there at the table. She wasn't looking at me either. She had this little smile, not a happy smile, just the kind of smile you get when something you expected finally happens. She pressed her lips together and reached for her water glass. I put my fork down very carefully. Apologize for what exactly? My mother's jaw tightened. You know what you did, I did know. 2 weeks earlier, I had told my father the truth about Lee's fiancé, Connor, that he had been fired from his last 2 positions for falsifying expense reports, that his family's real estate company was a 6-person operation barely staying afloat, not the empire they'd described at Thanksgiving. I hadn't done it to be cruel. I had done it because I genuinely believed my parents deserved to know before they handed over $100,000 to help with the wedding of the decade that Lee had been planning for 18 months. My father had not reacted the way I hoped. He had called me jealous. Then he'd called Connor and told him what I said. Connor had cried, apparently. Told them I'd always had it out for Lee. Told them I was the problem in the family. And my parents had believed him. So here we were. I'm not apologizing, I said. Everything I told Dad was true. My mother set her wine glass down so hard it clinked to the plate. This isn't about truth, Nora. This is about loyalty. Your sister is getting married. You should be happy for her. I am happy for her. I'm not happy about the fact that you're giving $100,000 to someone who... That is our money, my father said quietly. That was somehow worse than the yelling. When my father went quiet, it meant the decision had already been made. And this conversation is over. I looked around the table. Lee still had that small, pressed smile. My brother Kyle finally looked up from his phone, caught my eye, and looked away again. That was the moment I understood something I'd been trying not to understand for years. I was not an equal member of this family. I was a supporting character in Lee's story, and my value was contingent on how well I played that role. The moment I stepped outside it, the moment I introduced a fact that complicated the narrative, I became the problem. All right, I said. My father looked up. All right, I said again. I understand. I excused myself, went upstairs, and closed my bedroom door. I sat on the edge of my bed for about 4 minutes. Then I got up and started packing. I want to be clear about what my life looked like at that point. I was 28 years old. I had a master's degree in forensic accounting that I'd paid for myself through a combination of scholarship, loans, and 3 years of working weekends at a tax firm downtown. I had a job I loved, junior analyst at an independent financial investigations firm in Chicago, and I was good at it. I was, by any reasonable measure, a functional adult who did not need her parents' money. What I did need, or thought I needed, was their approval. I had been chasing that approval for so long that I'd stopped noticing how much of my life was organized around not upsetting them, not outshining Lee, not being too much. Too blunt, too independent, too focused on work, too willing to say uncomfortable things at the dinner table. The education piece, that was a long time ago, but it mattered. When I'd been accepted to the master's program, my parents had initially offered to help. Then Lee had decided to take a sabbatical from her marketing job to find herself in Europe, and suddenly the money wasn't there. I didn't get an explanation, just a phone call from my mother saying things were tight. I found out about the Europe trip from a Facebook post. I had paid for the degree myself. I never said a word about it. Standing in my childhood bedroom at 34, I was there for the holiday weekend. I packed my bags in under 40 minutes. I'd had practice. Not from leaving, but from the years of quietly, methodically handling things on my own. I texted my colleague Deb. Something came up. Heading back to Chicago tonight. Cover for me Monday? She texted back 3 question marks and then, obviously, you okay? I looked at my bag by the door. I will be, I wrote. I drove the 4 hours back to Chicago in the dark with the heat on and a true crime podcast playing low, and I felt nothing, not sad, not angry, just very, very clear. The thing about working in forensic accounting is that you spend all day looking for what people are trying to hide. You develop a kind of second sight for it, the number that doesn't line up, the transfer that happens on a Friday afternoon, the expense that gets routed through 3 accounts before it lands somewhere. You start to see the shape of concealment even before you can name it. I had not turned that skill on my own family. I had deliberately not. There are things you don't want to know. But that night, driving back, I started thinking about Connor. I had found the information about his firings through a source, a college friend who worked in HR at one of the companies. She hadn't volunteered it. I'd asked after Lee introduced him at Easter, and something felt off to me. He had this particular way of talking about money. Not bragging exactly, more like performing familiarity with it. Like someone who had studied wealthy people and was doing an impression. When I got home to my apartment at 2 in the morning, I didn't go to sleep. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started doing what I do. It took me 11 days. I want to say that slowly so it lands correctly. 11 days. That's how long it took me, working evenings and one full weekend, to build a picture of Connor Walsh that would have made anyone's blood run cold. The expense report falsifications were the beginning, not the end. Connor had a pattern going back 8 years. Small frauds, mostly, the kind that don't get prosecuted because the amounts aren't worth the legal fees. He'd bounced through 6 jobs in 4 cities. He had 2 civil judgments against him from former business partners. His family's real estate company, the one that was supposedly worth 8 figures, had filed for an extension on their taxes 3 years running and had 2 liens on the primary commercial property. And then there was the trust fund. Lee had a trust fund. My parents had set it up when she was born, added to it over the years, and it was now worth approximately $340,000. I knew about it because my grandmother had mentioned it once years ago, and I had never brought it up again because there was no version of that conversation that ended well for me. Lee was the golden child. Of course she had a trust fund. What I found, buried in a joint financial disclosure that Connor had filed incorrectly in a civil case 3 years earlier, was that he had done this before. He had been engaged once before, to a woman in Phoenix. The engagement had ended abruptly. 6 months later, she had filed a civil complaint alleging that he had manipulated her into adding him to a joint account and then drained $47,000 before disappearing. The case had settled out of court. There was a confidentiality agreement, but there was also a record of the case filing, and his name on it, and hers. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling of my apartment for a long moment. Then I picked up the phone and called my contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. His name was Agent Reyes, and I had worked with him twice before on cases through my firm. I explained that I had a personal situation and asked if I could walk him through some documents informally, off the record, just to get a read on whether what I was looking at was what I thought it was. He called me back the next morning. "Nora," he said, "where did you find this?" "Public records," I said. "Mostly." There was a pause. "You need to bring this in formally." I did not tell my family what I was doing. I want to be honest about that choice. I thought about it. I even drafted a text to my father. 3 separate drafts, each one deleted. But I kept coming back to something my mentor at work, a woman who had been doing this for 25 years, had said to me early in my career. Don't warn the fire before you call the fire department. What I did instead was call Lee's best friend, a woman named Dana, who I had always genuinely liked and who I knew instinctively did not entirely trust Connor either. Dana and I had never talked about it directly, but I had noticed things. The way Dana went quiet when Lee talked about him. The way she'd pulled me aside at Easter and said, almost to herself, "He's very charming, isn't he?" With that particular weight on charming. I didn't tell Dana everything. I told her enough. I told her that I had found something serious and that I needed her help with one specific thing. Making sure Lee did not sign any additional documents with Connor before a certain date. No lease agreements, no account access, nothing. Dana was quiet for a very long time. "How serious?" she asked. "Serious enough that I've talked to a federal agent," I said. Another silence, then, "Okay, I've got her." The formal investigation took 4 months. I was a cooperating witness and a source, which meant I was in a strange position, connected to the case but not in control of it. Agent Reyes was thorough and methodical and gave me almost no information about how it was progressing, which was both professionally appropriate and personally excruciating. During those 4 months, I did not contact my parents. My mother sent 2 emails that I read and did not respond to. My father sent one, which was 3 sentences long and ended with, "I hope you're doing some reflection." Kyle texted me a meme about family drama being exhausting, which I thought was an interesting choice. Lee called me once, in month 2. It was a Sunday afternoon and I almost didn't pick up, but something made me. "Connor said you're still spreading lies about him," she said. "Not hello, not how are you." "I haven't said anything to anyone about Connor since that dinner," I said, which was technically true. I had filed documents. That was different. He said you reached out to his family. I didn't. A pause. Mom and Dad are really hurt, Nora. I pressed my lips together. There was a version of me, the version that had lived in this family for 28 years, that would have started apologizing at that exact moment, just to make it stop, just to smooth it over. I know, I said instead. I hope they feel better soon. Lay hung up. The wedding was scheduled for June 14th. The investigation concluded on May 3rd. Connor Walsh was arrested on a Thursday morning. The charges included wire fraud, identity theft, and one count of attempted financial elder fraud. The last one related to what investigators had found when they looked at his communications with my parents about the wedding gift and the investment opportunity he'd been slowly introducing over the previous 3 months, which I had not even known about. I found out about the arrest the same way most people found out about things in my family. Not directly. Dana texted me 2 words. It happened, and then my phone started ringing. Not my parents, Lee. I picked up. She didn't say anything for almost 10 seconds. I could hear her breathing. You knew, she finally said. Yes, you knew and you didn't tell me. This is the part that people always get wrong about situations like this. They assume the person with the information is powerful, in control, orchestrating things. What I actually felt in that moment was grief. Pure and uncomplicated. My sister was on the other end of the phone, 4 weeks from her wedding, and the person she thought she loved was in federal custody, and I had known something was wrong for months and had made a calculated decision not to warn her directly. I tried to tell Dad, I said. At dinner, I got cut off. Another silence. I know, she said quietly, and I believed her. I believed she knew. What happened in the weeks after is hard to describe in a clean way because it wasn't clean. It was slow and complicated and deeply uncomfortable, the way that real things are. My parents did not call to apologize immediately. My mother called me 2 weeks after the arrest, and the first thing she said was that this was a very difficult time for all of them, which, yes, I agreed. It was. The conversation where my father actually said the words, "I'm sorry, I should have listened to you," happened 6 weeks later, over the phone, on a Tuesday evening when I was eating leftover pasta and watching nothing in particular on TV. He cried a little. I wasn't sure what to do with that, so I just let it happen. I looked at you across that table, he said, and I chose your sister's feelings over the truth. I knew, on some level, I just didn't want to know. I know, I said. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix it tonight, I told him. We have time. My mother took longer. My mother, honestly, is still in process. She is a woman who organized her identity around her family being a certain kind of family, and watching that structure crack has been genuinely painful for her, and she is not always graceful about it. But she is trying. I can see her trying. Lee. Lee is the complicated one. She lost the wedding she had planned for 18 months. She lost the man she thought she was going to build her life with. She also, eventually, understood that she almost lost $340,000 and her own financial future, and that the reason she didn't was because her sister, the one she'd sat next to at a dinner table while their parents dismantled that sister support system, had spent 11 evenings and 1 full weekend making sure she didn't. We had lunch in August, just the 2 of us. Lee ordered a Cobb salad and talked about potentially going back to school. She said she'd been thinking about getting a financial planning certificate. I didn't say anything about the irony of that. I just asked her what program she was looking at. She looked up from her salad and her eyes were wet. I didn't know he was going to do that to them, she said. The investment thing. I didn't know about that. I believe you, I said. But I knew something was off. She looked back down. I wanted it to work so badly. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I know, I said. I know you did. Connor Walsh pleaded guilty in September. As part of the plea agreement, he made financial restitution to 3 previous victims, including the woman in Phoenix. There was no restitution owed to my family because, thanks in part to Dana keeping Lee away from the joint accounts, and in part to the investigation moving quickly enough, he had not yet managed to access anything. My parents' $100,000 stayed in their account. The trust fund stayed in Lee's name. I drove home for Christmas that year, first time in 18 months. My mother made pot roast, and my father had decorated the front porch with more lights than was structurally advisable, and Kyle showed up with his girlfriend, who I had never met, and who turned out to be genuinely funny and warm in a way that made me like Kyle more than I had in years. We didn't talk about Connor at dinner. We talked about Kyle's girlfriend's ceramics hobby and my mother's book club and a road trip my father was planning to national parks out west. After dinner, I helped my mother with the dishes. We stood side by side at the sink and she handed me plates to dry, and at some point she said very quietly, "I should have trusted you." I kept drying the plate in my hand. "You trust me now," I said. She didn't say anything after that. But she reached over and briefly squeezed my arm, and I let her, and we finished the dishes without speaking. Later that night, I sat on the back porch in the cold with a cup of tea and looked at the dark yard, the same yard I'd grown up in, the same fence, the same oak tree that had grown so large its roots were lifting the edge of the patio. And I thought about the version of me who had sat across that dinner table and said all right and meant it as a door closing. I hadn't been planning anything that night. I had not thought to myself, I will expose him and restore my place in this family. I had just driven home alone and done the work. Because the work was what I knew. Because the truth, even when no one wants to hear it, still has weight, still has consequence. Still, eventually, slowly, imperfectly, lands where it should. I finished my tea. The oak tree was very still. I went back inside where it was warm and locked the door behind me.